Good afternoon, everybody. It's Wednesday, February 8th. It's 5 p.m. This is the Mocha live stream and podcast. My name is Max Cohen, lead writer for the Museum of Crypto Art. Joining me as he does every week is Colborne Bell, founder of the Museum of Crypto Art. And joining us specifically this week, our first ever guests on the Mocha Live podcast, performance artists Lori Baldwin and Una. Lori, Una, it's lovely to have you here.
Hello. Woo. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So, for those of you listening that have not heard of Una or Lori Baldwin before, A, you're doing yourselves a huge disservice, and B, you must not be very up to date on what we've been doing at the museum because published an essay about Una and Lori last week called Breastfeeding the Blockchain, which, more than just a clever name, also pretty well encapsulates, if I do say so myself, their brilliant work of performance art, Milking the Artist, which they debuted at Miami Art Basel this year in early December. Una, if you want to just kick us off, can you just tell me what the reaction was right after that piece kind of went down?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, and thanks, Mocha, and whoever is here. Thanks. I mean, like the actual performance, or the kind of culmination of the piece, which culminates in the wallet wash.
Yeah, and yes, no. So what I'm thinking is, you guys do this piece, right? It's the beginning of December. You come into Art Basel, you show it off. There's a ton of buzz. What was that immediate reaction like just thereafter?
If I'm being totally candid, absolute dread. It was kind of wild, and it just had a reaction that kind of took on legs of its own, and I really wasn't really kind of expecting the ways in which it was responded to. And I think that first time that a piece of art that I've done, especially a performance that I've done, has gotten that many eyeballs. So I think any time that as an artist you start to realize, like, oh wow, this art is being seen and perceived by a lot of people, there's a certain kind of death of the author that I experienced particularly, which was like, wow, look at all these asshole idiots on the internet. Like, how do I kind of engage with their feedback, and where does the art relay? And it's been really exciting to see the evolution of it go kind of from being picked up by like TMZ as like provocation, to it being considered by Mocha as like a piece of performance art, and giving this like rich history. Even the dissemination of the art piece has kind of been its own type of performance. But Laurie, am I missing anything? Do you want to add some color?
I mean, the only color I would add that was for me personally, I think dread. I don't know if I would say dread, but it was an intensity that I could not have anticipated. Because I've been a performance artist, and this has been my profession for over 10 years, but I've also never had a piece that has like taken on legs like this after the act itself. And then I found myself in like a total crazy nutso whirlwind, and in the middle of Central Florida visiting relatives who I haven't seen for years. So I was in this like really, really split dual reality, where on one hand I'm like going on an airboat ride and looking at crocodiles, and then I like get onto my phone as soon as we're off the airboat and the publicist, and then it's like everything is like exploding and popping on socials, and it's like trying to like call, like have these group calls, and this is like not who I normally. It was just like, it was a lot. And then granted, my relatives were like very sweet and supportive, but also like a little older, and like trying to like understand and catch up, and I'm like, I honestly don't even understand myself what the fuck's going on right now. So it was wild.
So, just for a very brief summary of the piece, and please, somebody stop me if I'm not doing a very good job. But Milking the Artist featured Una and Lori at Art Basel, kind of dominating very, I guess, haphazardly or suddenly, kind of like squarish, whitish corner of the space. It was performed twice at the Scope Performance Center, or the Scope Fair. I'm not sure what the exact name for it was. And also at the main Art Basel Convention Center. That's Colborne's cat.
I'm going on mute.
And Una opens her bodice, and or bodice, I've never said that word out loud. There's a pair of buxom breasts underneath that are squirting milk into a glass that Lori is honestly like very dexterously following around, trying to catch as much milk as possible. The milk is then open for bidding, not only as the physical glass of milk, but also an equivalent NFT. So that's kind of the immediate performance of the thing. And I learned about this piece from Colborne, who sent y'all my way. So Colborne, I was wondering how you first kind of came into contact with Milking the Artist.
I wish I had a memory like that. I don't know. Did you reach out, Una? I think Una might have messaged.
I am pretty sure that I sent you a DM being like, Colvon, are you thirsty? Do you want a glass of milk? And then we ended up getting on the phone.
Turns out I was. I'm perpetually thirsty.
Well, one of the reasons that I
don't
found
drink
this
milk though, so.
Are you an oat milk man?
I like oat milk and almond milk and yeah.
I've recently gone back to whole milk or like real milk after like a 10-year sojourn to the non-dairy milk side. And as a kid, I only really drank like skim because my dad was big on health. So it was only ever skim milk and like rarely 2%. And now I have whole milk in the fridge. And every time I pour it in like a cup of coffee, it's like this thick clotted stream. Just so
I don't want to be alarmist, but I'm not convinced our stream is actually working. On Twitter.
Is that true?
Should we do a little check?
Well, Twitter, at least for me, seems like it was down in the moments before I kind of reached out to everyone. My messages weren't working. I had a short freak out because I couldn't send the link to Lori. The good news is, whether people are with us now or whether they find us later,
I think
we're recording.
Sorry.
I'll leave that
Something's happening. Either
Yeah.
for now or for posterity.
Something's happening.
If it's
Lori,
worth anything, my Twitter's also not like the message. Nothing's loading. It's kind of like complaining. So
it just broke it. Too much traffic.
Lori,
yeah, I think that must have been it.
As somebody who's in and out of the crypto art world, if Twitter were to just implode right now and what we're actually experiencing is the sudden but permanent death of Twitter, how much would that affect your artistic livelihood?
Current livelihood or like what I've been doing up until now, kind of not like none at all. It really wouldn't impact me. I've only I have like a little over 100 followers now, and I only went onto Twitter like a couple weeks ago because it became clear that like, okay, I guess I have to like add another social media to my plethora. Like I kind of hate social media, so it's fine, whatever. So yeah, if Twitter implodes, I don't care. It's fine. It can die. I'm sure we'll find another way. There will always be another way.
I'm curious,
how would you feel?
Yeah.
Oh my god, if Twitter died, I think this character would just live fucking nowhere. It'd be like a distant memory and people's like short attention spans, you know. I didn't have socials before, you know, before I was born, obviously, and I was only born 1 year ago, really a year and a bit ago now, but I didn't have socials before I was born. So same thing, you know, joined Twitter and I remember the days when it was like, cool, I have like 80 followers and like 75 followers, and then going to live events is really the only way that I've like managed to grow it. And I kind of hate it, if I'm being honest. It feels like this disgusting ball and chain that, you know, if I lean a little bit more into it, I get to have some more fun, but it's just so frustrating how centralized the algorithms are. And like, you know, I'll give you kudos, like this background image, I absolutely love it. The Mocha podcast, like kind of like, I think it's funny, but it's so
amazing.
obvious that an algorithm cannot read it, therefore it goes nowhere. And it's really frustrating to kind of like be trying to create art that doesn't have this aesthetic appeal that an algorithm likes, and simultaneously trying to only pump it out on a very centralized algorithm. So back to you, Max.
I mean, I completely agree. You know, especially as I publish writing or as the museum publishes writing, we can only really, you know, the algorithm doesn't see, you know, a 4,000 word article. It sees a tweet about it that's usually pretty punchy and maybe a couple of pulled quotes. But the hard work is not there for the audience, right? The algorithm itself, Twitter, as a free-thinking, potentially sentient algorithmic entity, has no idea about the depth of my insight or lack thereof.
Oh, God. Yeah, well, you know, that was interesting too, because one thing that Laurie and I tried to do with the wallet washing was like, okay, let's try and beat the system. And so we did a little bit of like pumping. So we did artists or influencers, and that was basically like we would pay people to quote retweet. And that was at the time that the algorithm changed and quote retweets started to do horribly. Like no one started to see them. So it was really interesting to kind of like try and be keeping up with this kind of algorithm, and it's simultaneously just like shifting but not quite telling you where it's shifting, right? It's this like dark shadowy puppeteering that happens. And I mean, I was really happy with the ability to kind of pay other artists to retweet, and it was a funny way of subverting like influencer culture for me, and really negating this idea of like it's worth paying people. Like if we're all in an ecosystem together, then it's worth having some method of like redistribution of kind of the attention. But I was really, and I continue to be really frustrated with this like paradigm that, you know, a few people have more clout or more access, or they go farther, and that's what makes something like pop in NFT Twitter. So I guess this is part of my bitterness. I don't know, I'm being bitter, and like, Colborne, I'll pass it to you because you've been very bitter on Twitter lately.
Yeah, Colborne.
Yes.
How have you've been, so you're a Twitter master, right? And you in fact made the graphic behind Una's head very quickly, hastily, to wonderful effect.
On Apple Pages.
On Apple Pages. But you've been doing this for quite some time, right? Working within the crypto art world, and especially with the algorithm and such. You must have some kind of an understanding of it, I would presume. Have you seen like dramatic changes like this before?
It's just so brutal. I don't know. Have I? Probably. It's like I mean, it's just impossible. I can't make any sense of it. I don't try to make any sense of it. I don't think people should take it so seriously. People seem to take it very, very seriously. My grand conspiracy, and I'm like the all-time conspiracist, is that like people that have outsized influence on Twitter control armies of bots. Like I don't think any of this is real, and I think it's all programmed, and you can pay people to kind of program it for you, and then it just is almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point of all of this fake attention might attract a couple real people. But I can say that like when we had 5,000 users, we got just as much, if not more, attention, views, impressions than we do now at like 75.
Interesting. I remember, Una, the first time we met, you had told me that as a gift you were going to send me 10,000 Twitter followers, and I begged you not to, knowing the effect that would have on my psyche.
One day, darling, one day. I mean,
Yeah.
I personally, like on my Instagram, I just fucking went and I bought 10,000 followers. And then I have like on my first highlight, it's like, what if I told you that Una wasn't real and all of these followers were fake, and all this, like, just putting it out there. But the funny thing is, like, people will still go to my page when I first meet them, and they'll be like, oh, you have 10,000 followers. And I'll be like, yeah, they're bots. But for a second, it hits this register of like, oh, there's some degree of importance that we haven't managed to separate kind of. I don't want to be so rude and call it like sheep mentality, because it's not quite sheep mentality, but it is like a linkage of a high numerical value to an automatic sense of worth, which, like, if we want to come full circle back to milking the artist, that's why we fucking pumped the bag, because it was like, you know, in order for people to think that something's important, you need to attach a really big price tag to it. And in order for people to think that you're cool and you have clout and your artwork matters, you need to have a lot of fake followers. So yeah.
Well, if I may, it's very interesting, I think, the schism with the crypto art, you know, minded performance art that you two have recently done with performance art, as it's historically been done, where you don't have an imaginary audience like you do potentially here, right? And Lori, maybe you could speak to this more, having, you know, a long history, I know, of like theatrical and performance art, but you know, you see physically the amount of people that are witnessing the performance, instead of, I think, what a lot of people are dealing with on Twitter, artists of all kinds, where your audience is kind of imaginary and kind of something you have to like infer rather than see in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, it changes, for me personally, it changes completely the nature of the performance. I think it also changes the nature of like my modality, how I even would frame it, like everything. I think like for me, the audience, if we're talking about live performance, when you're like actual bodies in a room, like the liveness of the actual happening, the impermanence of it, and I think like on an energetic level, that exchange that's happening between I'm here, you're here, we're having this thing together, this piece would not literally not be the same if you weren't here. If you're doing something that's like purely digital or to imaginary audience that you don't know, don't see, have no like direct connection to, I think it can, how do I say it can work, but it changes the thing. Well, I'm having fucking deja vu. Sorry,
Yay.
yeah, been here before. So it
This is a
changes
Twilight
the.
Zone.
Where are
Oh
we?
my
Did we
gosh.
slide into a
This
parallel
is liminal
universe?
space.
Oh my god. Anyway, so it changes the nature of the thing. So I mean, if you're performing, I mean, you can think of like Twitter, you can think of social media, you can think of TikTok, Instagram also as performative in their own way, but then you are distributing to an audience that you're kind of hoping is there, and then you're having to kind of play with and embody whatever aesthetic is like hot at the moment, or whatever the algorithm is going to whatever the algorithm's going to like. So then there's another thing, you kind of start to perform for the algorithm. You think that becomes like your first point of call. It's your first audience member that you have to keep in mind. So like there's certain things that you can't do because the algorithm will censor you. You'll get shadow banned like Una has been. And at the same time, there's certain things that you have to do. So you have to show, for example, if we're talking purely Instagram, I know if I show just the right amount of skin in the right way, then the algorithm loves it. But if I show the wrong skin in the wrong way, like no, that doesn't pass, that doesn't fly. And like it's so obvious. Like if you just look at, if I look at my own photos that I have posted, it's so clear like which ones we can say the algorithm likes, but also like just appeal to like a wider population. But my question for myself, and I don't know, it's a hypothetical question, is it that it's actually appealing to more people, or are more people seeing it because the algorithm liked it? Like, does the algorithm really like love that much that anytime I post something where I'm cute with my partner, it's like, oh my God, everyone loves it? Or is it people really like it? Or is it some weird combination of both? I don't know. So if the algorithm becomes your audience, it changes the conversation. Una, to you?
It's like a self-perpetuating like dragon almost. Like it says that this is what you eat, and then it's simultaneously feeding you. It says that this is what you eat, and it's simultaneously feeding you. And then I will say that like the joyous, wow, big words here, the most joyful experience that I've had on Twitter, kind of in inspecting this audience, and especially Laurie, like you and I can riff off of this for a while because it was so much fun, like interacting with AI accounts that was semi-autonomous and semi-algorithmically driven. Like one night I remember like they commented on the Milking the Artist piece, and then we literally went back and forth for like 30 minutes just kind of asking all these questions, and it didn't really matter who was on the other end of it, whether or not it was like a program or an algorithm or a human. Hi Akichi. It doesn't really matter what it is. And I think that that's one area that I've seen Twitter particularly like excel at, is offering this kind of AI input where you don't know who you're interacting with, and the anonymity of that character as human or non-human, as to like trying to differentiate where the layers of sentience are, is fascinating. And like that to me is very fun. So that's what I wanted to add, that it hasn't been all bad. There's been like 2 good accounts.
Well, it's interesting, I think, with Milking the Artist's success in terms of the algorithm. Una, it was you who had let me know about Pussy Riot's very similar performance of sorts in the last few days, where they very similarly, I think they burned something or other for a piece called Putin's Ashes, which here for. But then they sold it potentially to the DAO that they own and operate, which feels strikingly similar to what you two did with Milking the Artist, perhaps just gaining more visibility because they're a more visible group with a wider reach. But the reason I think that's interesting is because when I think about Milking the Artist as being, the kind of progenitor of this idea, and who knows if, Pussy Riot's Putin's Ashes is going to then lead to more kind of imitators or influences. But I think that in crypto art specifically, we've seen a huge predilection and an emphasis on exalting things that are first. Right. And we see that with the crummy squiggles of art blocks. And we see that with crypto punks. People put clout and people put financial weight behind things that were there first. Right. And I guess my question to the floor, Colborne, maybe we can start with you just because you've been in the space the longest, is where did this kind of obsession with being first come from? And why do you think it's had such a hold?
We'll talk about something that the algorithm loves. It must love that word, and people love that word. Def Beef has like the all-time greatest collection of algorithmically generated firsts. It's a 10,000 collection before 10,000s were hot, and it's amazing. I encourage people to check it out. Because it makes people, first and foremost, it makes people really angry, because whatever you're claiming to be the first at, undoubtedly you are not, right? So like,
Exactly.
and then if you want to get like ultra derivative and say like you are the first to do like this thing with this caveat, and like say ABC banana in that order, like sure, of course you're first. It could not be more meaningless.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because we do, even without the reality of who's first and who's not first, right? There's still a push to position oneself as if they're first, right? It's the marketing. But that's, again, I think kind of unique to crypto art, because it's not like Dali was the first surrealist, even though he's the most thereafter successful, nor was Warhol the first pop artist. And even if they were, that's not really part of their legend. Yet still here we remain kind of caught like weirdly in the middle of crypto culture, kind of forging this new identity for itself away from art culture, but also taking this piece of like crypto culture, right? Where, Ethereum still maintains its cultural capital because people were building on it long before there were any other competing blockchains. So the fact that it was first was a strategic advantage in terms of the quality of the product that it offers.
Look, to be fair, we weren't even like the first museum of crypto arts, but we didn't know we weren't the first until like 6 months after the project was born. We already had the website. We already had all the names. We already had like, so what does it mean? Nobody knows everything, right? Even the research that you do will never direct you to what actually is. So blockchain's kind of cool because like it can be timestamps that it could be the first, and there's proof there. But no human really will ever do that digging. I think that's all going to be automated in the future.
And that has such a relation to, go Lori, go.
No, I'm just I think with this I think there is a general like contemporary cultural obsession with being first and with innovation and with being like, yeah, I think you're also onto something here, that it's people are attracted to it for a reason. And I have no like conclusion. I'm just like mumbling in my mind. And like, is it attached to an idea that if you're first, then you can be automatically the best? Or if you're first, then you have first dibs at the resources that are associated with this? Or like with crypto specifically, if you are the first in, you get it at a low price, and then lucky you, it like skyrockets the value later, but you were first. So you were like in among the first, and you don't have to be the first, but you were like in the early days. So you could kind of catch and capitalize on the value. So I think there is a connection between this idea of being like first and the value that we assign to it. And maybe it doesn't work necessarily retroactively. So like, we're not looking at artists and being like, oh, they were the first person to do this, though we are sometimes. I think there is the innovation and artistry can be connected, and then people can be celebrated for that. But when we're thinking about like now, we're so saturated with content, we're so saturated with like connectivity, that then when there's something that's new, well, of course it's appealing. And if it's the first of the thing, well, it adds a layer of excitement because that person was so clever to find something new in a world where we feel like there's no newness. At the same time, we're being like barraged with like, look at this, look at this, look at this. So I don't know, the idea of first somehow like allows something to emerge from the barrage. Does that make sense? Una?
Yeah,
Yeah, look, and I think it all makes sense, and I think that there is a certain linkage of what you're talking about, and like I've examined this in my own mind, so it probably won't make sense when I try and articulate it out loud, but there is a relationship between kind of, you know, being new to an idea, being first to crypto, being first to NFTs. Like if you go back to the digital like art conference that happened with the Rare Papers in like 2018, like those people, there is a certain degree of like a willingness to be very fringe in the art world. There is a willingness to be very fringe in terms of conceptualizing what art is and what digital identity is and digital ownership is. That, you know, there's merit associated with being willing to go that fringe to layers of knowledge. And I understand why people would want to be like protective over that, and why people are like, you know, wear this badge of honor in the Twitter bios of like, this is the time when I first minted, because it does mean that you had some degree of like knowledge or experience or depth. And like, I want to validate that as like a very, I think that's special. But I think this notion of like first, it's very like, whoa, stroke the bell ends, mate. It's like, you're really kind of like massaging the wrong angle of it. And one thing that I've kind of noticed is interesting, and like, you know, I think that maybe Colbon, you're one of the few that I know that doesn't actually do this, but there's like a layer of like OG that it's so hard to communicate with if you are new because of the constant barrage. And I totally, in some way, I understand and I respect and I get the barrage and how that would be deflating. But it's almost like there does need to be a council of elders that you can go to and be like, cool, these are like the NFT OGs. And it's not fucking NFT now. So like, you know, like don't go looking there for information, because that's going to lead you down like one circle jerk that just like is not actually what the ethos of crypto art is about. And like also this relates deeply to Ursula Le Guin's handbag theory of literature, that the first tool is like traditionally attributed to an axe or a sword or like some type of like instrument used to slice, but the first tool is actually a bag that we use to carry the baby. So you know, like all of these ideas that we talk about in crypto, we also have to remember that these are nowhere near new. They're just different iterations of things that have been evolving for like a while. So I will pass the mic back to you, Max.
well, so this is making me think about a quote from Claire Silver's website that I kept running into when I was writing about her last month, and which I found incredible, which is, with the rise of AI for the first time, the barrier of skill is swept away. Taste is the new skill, right? And of course, that's AI specific. But in another sense, the crypto art space specifically is a glut of artistry, right? And really, really, really like palpably skillful artistry, right? Whether there are artists who are making incredible amounts of sales or not, like what I think we can agree on is that from all corners of the globe, you know, as you go down your Twitter feed, you are constantly coming in contact with artists who have a unique style and also have an incredible amount of technical skill, right? And so I think that does kind of, it does make these secondary denominators of talent more important, right? To go back to the Warhol and the Dali example, there weren't 1,000 surrealists competing for the crown of, you know, alpha surrealist, right? Una, are you timing out for me?
Yeah, you're getting timed out.
Dali was like a wife beater, like, and we only know his name because the people that chose to write the books were about him. Like, there's literally like, you know, everyone thinks that like Kandinsky is the father of abstract expressionism. No, it's Hilda Ofklint, and it wasn't until like a documentary came out 2 years ago that everyone was like, oh wow, maybe like it was this person who actually did it. Like, even the way that we disseminate information has such, you know, like the history, sorry, that's my dog Jazz, even like the history books that are going on about it, like that's a centralized form of algorithm that's pushing one idea. So like even when we're internally referencing these things as static, we need to remember that this is not static knowledge. Like knowledge that came before it is still very malleable, because we're still trying to question like where it came from. And I've recently been going on this like huge thing about anyone who like references Picasso or Dali, and I'm like, they were both white beaters.
That was only to say, look, I'm more of a, Leonora Carrington guy myself, but it was only to say that in the cultural imagination, right, or like the popular understanding of the form, there is usually one figure, deserving or not, is kind of, at least in my eyes, kind of outside the conversation. One figure always comes to the forefront, right? It's the Kandinskys, it's the Basquiats, it's the Mondrians, it's the Warhols, right? Whether I guess the point that I was trying to make regardless is that there was still some technical skill involved, right? Whether Dali, to continue the example, is the most technically skilled of the surrealists is up for debate, but there at least is an agreement that there was technical skill here, right? And I think whereas we look now that everybody has technical skill, things like being first or the posturing of being first become more important, because the taste, the timeline, the who had the idea beforehand, right, who had the vision, all of those things now start to factor into our idea of quality. But I love this idea, Una, that you brought up, right, about the kind of artistic continuum being written by scholars and history professors, and whatever kind of subverted academia has decided to exalt certain characters. So I was wondering, in your perspective or from your opinion, is there a way to avoid that in the space we're in now, right? As the story of CryptoArt gets written, probably against a lot of our will, do you see avenues towards preserving a more truthful, or at the very least, a more diverse record of what's going on here than I think we can all imagine will be put down?
I think that's a really good question. And it makes me think of two things. One being like, yes, inextricably, because blockchain like has a proof, timestamp, like Cobalt mentioned earlier, and that will inevitably be helpful for authorship, for kind of like who did what and when. But I'm sorry, I'm just checking out my dogs behind me. But I think that when you look at knowledge, and this is like a Donna Haraway here, like situated knowledge, that knowledge is always in a web. And so a web is always in continuous motion. Jazz, really, right now, come here. That knowledge is always in continuous motion, and it's always it's never a fixed or static point. And wherever you're at in that web is the knowledge for that angle, right? So we could both be looking at the same central point, but if I'm looking from down here and you're looking from up here, we're both seeing two different angles to the same degree of knowledge. And so I think even spreading an idea like that, like knowledge is always situated and localized to the perspective in which you're addressing it from, enables this kind of perceiving of knowledge as like 360. And that might sound quite basic, but I know in my personal life, like I really didn't understand that for so long, the things or ideas that I thought were very fixed and very structured were not. And even when I go to like thinking back, come here, Jazz, of when I first got into crypto, I had like a massive amount of respect for certain artists or certain institutions. And I thought that they were all like, wow, how are they getting this much press or this much attention? And the more that I just kind of dug into them, I was like, oh, this person always gets written about by this institution because they're actually own this, and this person pumps this person's bag because they have this. The same way of like, I'm just like on a roll of shitting on them right now, so let's just like continue. NFT Now, like I was always like, oh, how do these artists like get featured on NFT Now? And it was like, oh, let's go to Matt Medved's wallets, right? Guess who's in them? The artists that get featured. And it's like totally like kind of, I think that we need to have like a mass stripping of like knowledge as an independent thing that we each create from our own, that is so distinct from any type of institution that tries to claim that it has a degree of kind of media literacy. Now, obviously, this is everyone but Mocha. Mocha is the original unsellout. So all the article that they wrote about us is totally true, and believe every word.
Oh, I'm a fucking sellout.
Although I did buy Una's piece before we did all this stuff, so full transparency.
It's true. And Cobalt, you should buy more. Thank you.
Sorry.
I will
like the
literally
piece
write
well.
anything for likes. And that is
But how many likes? What's the threshold?
You can't eat
How
likes.
many?
Ken, I don't know.
Yeah.
We have a piece in the Genesis collection called Thought Eating Vitamin Like, and it's this really grotesque kind of like 3D sculpture of
I was
what?
so angry when I saw that Mocha had that in their permanent collection that I went on like a Twitter rampage at Mocha and I was like, why does this belong in there? What does it say about women? I don't know if any of you remember that, but I do, and I remember.
Okay, for what it's worth, when I was going through the Genesis collection and writing pieces, I did kind of excoriate that piece because I don't like it. But the point remains that there was at least one artist who was proffering the idea that you could eat likes. Colburn, do you remember off the top of your head who created that piece?
Yeah, it's
Anonymous.
ambiguous. It's
Ambiguous. Shout out Ambiguous.
I met Ambiguous once in Central Park.
Like on purpose?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I loved their work. I loved everything they created. I think it's a test. I think somebody that got totally steamrolled, like independent thinker, and totally just like steamrolled, kicked out of the space.
I'll pour one out for our fallen homie, Ambiguous. We see you.
I hope they're still making art.
Whether we like your work or not, we see you. I'd like to just quickly return to the idea of context. How is that for a segue?
Perfect. Well done.
That's a battering ram of segue. But Lori, so we were talking about artistic context, right? And I think that a context that has not extrapolated itself out into the public imagination, like the surrealist or the pop artist, is performance art. I don't have a reason for that necessarily. Perhaps you could offer a reason, but I was wondering, like, if you were writing if you were that subverted academia persona and you were writing this history of performance art or providing context, like, where would you start? Because I would like to know, and I would bet, no offense to our listeners, but I would assume that most people generally don't have like a solid grasp on the best of the best performance art.
The best of the best. You're
Maybe
making
not
me. Oh God. Where would I start for the history? Yeah, who's the first, right? Yeah, who's the first? Who's the original performance artist? I was just gonna say that. Jesus was the original performance artist for sure. Son of God, the whole thing. It was a big show. No,
I think that was a ripoff, actually. There was an Egyptian who was doing it first. So
God, you're right. You know what?
Just another way.
Dial back. Let's just dial back even further. Maybe if we go to a parallel plane, we can zoom out and we look. No, actually, it was the aliens who colonized planet Earth. I think they're probably the first performance artists, and then they were like, actually, this is too much work. We'll just get them to do it for us. So we're all performance artists performing for the aliens who colonized us.
I like that.
I think that
Lori,
summarizes it.
Lori, if life is performance art, are we the artists or are we the paint?
Or the canvas.
I think it depends, I think sometimes you can be paint and sometimes you can be the artist, and it depends on the circumstance, and maybe it depends on you. Some people are more paint than artists. Some people are more artists than paint. I'm just bullshitting. So no, but I think we can go back to the original question, which is history of performance art. But I still don't really have a firm answer for that.
Which is who gets your goat, right?
Who gets my goat? Oh, I mean, the Dada
This
movement
is Lori
amazing.
Baldwin's history of performance art.
Does it have to be?
It does.
Okay, fine. It has to be. My history of performance art. I mean, Marina Abramovich is a very obvious one. She captured my heart from a very young age, and I was like, "You're amazing." I think she is if she's not the first, but she's like up there for me, and like the canon, the people who are like really breaking the boundaries and really doing lots. Like she has such an incredible body of work, and I think what I really like about her, and as like a through line in her work, is her quality of presence. And this goes back to something I was saying earlier. I think one of the things that she really like nails is this like idea of inviting being seen, which I have to credit a collaborator, Luisa Moraes, who like shared this idea with me, this idea of inviting being seen. So you as a performer aren't there necessarily to like blast and take up lots of space, maybe, but like it comes from the original point of like you're opening up the invitation for the audience to look at you, and you're inviting this gaze. And I think this is really nice, and it's something that I see in Marina's work that she really, really does. She has this like really calm, like almost matter of fact energy. You can see it in some of her pieces, that she's there and she's there with you, and you're having this experience together. And this for me is the foundation for any piece of performance. So I'm just gonna leave you with her as my like she gets my goat for sure.
That's fair. Well, maybe as like, you know, a kind of final capstone question, but I think that would be a lot of people's answer, right? And I think that Marina Abramovich, uniquely amongst the grander artistic continuum, is at the forefront of her field and agreed upon as such by those with any kind of fleeting knowledge. So I guess the question is, and especially after having heard you two talk really animatedly about like the Guerrilla Girls and Valley Export, right? These really important feminist performance artists and the kind of continuum of feminist performance art, which is like, why in performance art uniquely is there this kind of continuum in history of sexual discussion, of femininity, of gender discussion, where that really seems to be lacking in basically every other like nameable artistic movement?
I mean, I can kick us off and then Laurie. Yeah, I can't really speak to why other women would do it, right? I can obviously have a clear understanding, but I think that for me, performance art felt so natural because almost, you know, and it goes back to like A Ways of Seeing by John Berger, like a dissection of it that as soon as you, also the second sex, it opens, right? The second sex, wow, I'm just jumping around really quickly. The second sex opens with a sentence about when babies are born in this French hospital, the boys get a sticker that say, "I'm a boy," and the girls get a sticker, "Yay!" and the girls get a sticker that says, "It's a girl." So that kind of objectification and that kind of like commodification of the identity of girlhood, of womanhood, of all of those things begins so young. And so for me, always kind of being very aware that there was always a layer of performance to my life, whether or not I wanted it, I was always a point of gaze, or always a point where people would project this imagery onto me. It only seemed natural to then try and use that in a way where it felt like I could have some degree of artistic expression through the body, right? And performance art is always contextual, durational, and not always of the body now that I'm thinking about it, but mostly of the body. So this idea of, yeah, using reality as a canvas in a place where already as women, you get looked at in so many different ways. Already as women, you're perceived in so many different ways. And like I said this on the podcast I did with Colborne, but like my entire life, I've been very aware of people looking at me. And so now as Una, I do these outrageous kind of outfits, costumes, everything. And it's like, good luck not fucking looking at me. And that is like a little act of defiance that I like. Mademoiselle Laurie?
Oh, I have many thoughts on this actually. So okay, if we're going like from the gender theory angle, and we think about what Judith Butler writes about gender being performative. It's exactly this example that you are assigned one at birth, and then you are like essentially expected to perform this gender role for your life, and this is the like expected social performance that we're all engaging in. And she talks about the speech act. So like the moment that the child is born, then the speech act itself of assigning gender is also performative, but it's also transformative. It does something and it changes the nature of this person's reality because they now have to be XYZ. So this is like one side. So I think there is something inherently performative about gender, period, just how it is. And that's how I think of it. And then if we think about femininity, there's a lot of, I can't remember the name of the author right now, but I read this really wonderful article about drag and why drag queens tend to have a lot more visibility than drag kings. And her theory was that femininity is much more performative. So we're expected to perform at like a higher, a kind of like a more overt and higher, I don't know if higher is the right word, but it's more extroverted, more fabulous, more makeup, clothes, hair, flashy, shiny. All of these things are like associated inherently, not inherently, but associated socially with femininity. So if femininity is more performative, then you can only, that is the only surface on which you can then keep performing. Whereas performing masculinity is like a downplay, right? I mean, I'm talking for being really, really binary here, because of course there's a lot of people doing drag who are really like fucking it all up and like putting things on their head and doing a really amazing work. So if we're being like super binary about it, yeah, we know a lot of drag performers. But if we're being super binary, there is something that's like extrovertly performative about femininity, and so then you can use it as a canvas for subversion. And I think that's what I think that's what Guerrilla Girls are doing. I think that's what Ballet Export is doing. It's kind of taking the social frame and being like, yeah, we see what you're doing here, and I'm going to play with it. And I'm going to turn on its head, or I'm going to turn up the volume on it, which will maybe just get your attention. Like, nudity, sexuality can be a gateway drug into something else, into something deeper, into opening up doors for provocative thought. And I think it's a handy tool. And I am the same. Like I'm the same. I am similarly to Una in my practice as a performer. There was a point where I really started to see that, oh, this is something I can use. And this is something I can fuck with. And this is something that will absolutely get people's attention. And now that I have their attention because they think I look hot, now I can say something interesting. And I'm not saying this is the only mode of performance, and I have many, and Una has many, but I think it's a very handy tool, especially when you're doing guerrilla performance, especially when you're trying to catch attention really quickly, especially if we go back to performing for the algorithm, coming full circle. If you're performing for the algorithm, the more fabulous you look, the better the algorithm's going to like you. And then you can say something cheeky, smart, provocative, whatever, but it gets attention. So it's
but they'll just think you're a thought for likes, right? Mocha,
Well,
I'm not going to give up on that piece, just so you know.
It's hard
Either way,
either way,
it explains my lack of engagement. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate it. Now that I know it's my appearance and not just a fleeting thought. Speaking of appearances, it appears that we are out of time for today. Another sterling segue. This conversation has truly been a pleasure. I'd like to, on the record, on the stream, thank Una and Lori Baldwin for joining Colborne and I tonight.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to all of our listeners for coming along with us on this journey. We love you. We really do.
We really do.
We
really love you.
And if you get one thing out of this conversation, it's that we're desperate for your engagement, all four of us. So please give Lori a reason to stay on Twitter. Una's having a bad day. Throw her a like. And I'm like 180 followers away from 1,000. So if you have to just make a couple accounts and
call your friends.
Yeah, the writing's good too. So anyways, this has been another edition of Mocha Live. It's been a pleasure having you. It's been a pleasure being had, I'm sure. And we'll speak to you all next week.
Arrivederci. Thank you.
Thank you.